Managing Ethics Risks and Opportunities, presented by Christopher Duty and Zhengwang Lin. Here is an overview of the various topics we will be discussing in today's presentation. Whereas traditional enterprise risk management focuses on financial impacts on shareholders, ethics risk management focuses on both the financial and non-financial impact on stakeholders. While the traditional enterprise risk management approach can uncover some ethics-related risks, it does not examine thoroughly for all the ethics risks and the underlying ethics-related causes of other risks. Both shortcomings render prevention efforts ineffective and unnecessarily consign companies to have to remedy costly problems. It will not explore deeply for the ethics risks and opportunities because of the following reasons. First, it does not specifically search for ethics risks or values-related risks, including cultural support risks, mindset risks, and systemic ethics risks. Second, it is somewhat misdirected at identifying, assessing, and remedying specific risk outcomes associated with events rather than examining for ethics-related casualty. Third, it is often undertaken as a perfunctory compliance exercise. Ethics risk management is important to recognizing risks due to not meeting stakeholders' expectations, which could lead to loss of support, and recognizing opportunities from exceeding stakeholders' expectations so that more support would be generated based on competitive advantage. In June 2016, COSO released an exposure draft, Enterprise Risk Management, aligning risk with strategy and performance, where enterprise risk management was designed to manage risks through recognizing culture and capabilities, applying practices, integrating with strategy setting and its execution, managing risk to strategy and business objectives, linking to creating, preserving, and realizing value. The new enterprise risk management framework suggests an organization should understand how mission, vision, and core values from the initial expression of acceptable types and amount of risk for consideration when setting strategy, the possibility of strategies and business objectives not aligning with the mission, vision, and core values, the types and amounts of risks the organization potentially exposes itself to from the strategy that has been chosen, and the types and amount of risk to executing its strategy and achieving business objectives. Some directors and executives presume that their external auditors who were reviewing for risks would bring any risks found to the attention of management and/or directors, but this reliance is misplaced because of the following reasons. Firstly, the normal external audit usually only concerns itself whether the risks found would have resulted in a material misstatement which might represent the operations or financial position of the company. Secondly, there never has been a requirement for external auditors to search for and report any ethics risks or opportunities. The Statement of Auditing Standards 99, released by the AICPA in response to the Enron and WorldCom disasters and SOX, illustrates how external auditors have been redirected toward greater fraud awareness, examination, and reporting thereon. Specifically, SIS 99 requires the following. First, mandatory discussion and brainstorming among the audit team and about the potential and causes for material misstatement in the financial statements due to fraud before and during the audit. Second, guidance to be followed about data gathering and audit procedures to identify the risks of fraud. Third, mandatory assessment of the risks of fraud based on the risk factors found and under revised assumptions of management innocence to guilt as follows. Presume ordinarily that there is a risk of manipulation of revenues due to fraud and investigate, and always identify and assess the risks that management could override controls as fraud risks. Fourth, increase standards for examination documentation and reporting on the audit steps taken to ensure that manipulation did not occur. To identify ethics risks, an investigator can either adopt an ethics risk review or perform an audit of the values and practices that underlie the organizational activities. A series of questions could be asked, including, do or will the values employed affect any stakeholder negatively? Are the values employed justifiable and sustainable? Or are there alternative values that would be optimal and sustainable? To ethics, risk, and opportunity identification and assessment. In phase one, ethics, risk identification, and assessment process should begin with the identification of the corporation's major stakeholders and their interests. Investigators should then rank stakeholder interests in importance using the urgency, legitimacy, and power framework and dynamic influence analysis. Upon then, investigators should have a projected understanding of which stakeholder interest issues are sensitive and important and why. Next, the investigator should confirm these projections by interacting with a representative stakeholder panel and with important stakeholder groups. This will show concern for their interests and open a dialogue that should build trust that could be helpful if unfortunate problems arise later. At the end of this process of stakeholder consultation, a confirmed grid of important stakeholder expectations for performance should emerge. In phase two, investigators should consider the corporation's activities and assess the risks of not meeting or the opportunities of exceeding expectations. The comparison should be done in three perspectives. The first perspective refers to the relevant input, output, quality, and other variables of corporate performances. Comparison should also be using the 6 hypernorm values that are universally respected in most cultures, which include honesty, fairness, comparison, integrity, predictability, and responsibility. The thought is, if corporate activities respect these values, there is a good chance that those activities will also respect the expectations of the corporation's important stakeholders, domestic and foreign, now and in the future. Finally, the comparison should be reassessed from the perspective of potential impacts on the corporation's reputation. Charles Fombrun's model, where the reputation depends on 4 factors, trustworthiness, credibility, reliability, and responsibility, can be a helpful framework to organize the comparison needed. Specific corporate needs should dictate the nature of the reports presented, but consideration should be given to at least the following reports of ethics, risks, and opportunities: by stakeholder group, by product or service, by corporate objective, by hypernorm value, and by reputation driver. This set will provide data that will allow directors and executives to monitor ethics, risks, and opportunities, to plan to avoid and mitigate risks, and to strategically take advantage of opportunities. Ethics risks exist when the ethical expectations of stakeholders are not met, which result in loss of reputation and stakeholder support, and prevent full and/or efficient achievement of strategic objectives. Important ethics risks include the following: organizational culture risks, which exist when an organization's culture fails to provide sufficient support and guidance to ensure a culture of integrity; mindset risks, which exist when decision makers, employees, and agents are improperly motivated or use unethically unsound rationales for their decisions; and systemic risks, which often originate outside an organization and affect an entire system or of activity. Most investigative and forensic accounts subscribe to the following logic regarding a fraudster. He or she has to have the opportunity to act improperly. He or she has to be motivated by an unbalanced self-interest based on greed, ego, or status, and/or the need to pay for drugs or offset losses. And he or she has to use a faulty or unethical rationale for his or her decision. There are 7 common rationalizations of immoral decisions, including denial of responsibility, denial of injury, denial of the victim, condemnation of the condemners, appeal to higher loyalties, everyone else is doing it, and entitlement. Now we're going to introduce you to the model for effective stakeholder relations. This approach focuses on the potential for stakeholders to pose threats to the organization or to cooperate with it. Stakeholders can be susceptible to invitations to collaborate or become co-supporters, or if they are not amenable to the company's position, consideration may be given to their need for monitoring or when a defense is needed against them. The model ranks the most desirable stakeholder group as Type 1, who is likely to pose a low threat to an organization's objectives and a high degree of cooperation with them. It's suggested to involve this group more closely with the organization because they are likely to be supportive. A less desirable shareholder group is the one ranked high on cooperation and high as a potential threat and holds some promise, i.e. is a mixed blessing, and is referred to as a Type 4. It is probably wise to try to collaborate with them to keep them as supporters. Where a stakeholder group is ranked as a high threat and a low cooperator, i.e. Type 3, they are considered a non-supportive and should be defended against. A group low in potential to threaten and low in potential to cooperate is marginal to the development of the support for companies' objectives, i.e. Type 2, but it may be wise to monitor them. As corporations extend the accountability coverage from shareholders to stakeholders, whoever is interested in corporate social responsibility or sustainability plans and performance is referred to as a corporate citizen. Regardless of which label is chosen, either CSR, sustainability, or corporate citizenship, all refer to the degree to which an organization takes the interests of stakeholders into account and takes actions. The Sustainability Reporting Guidelines developed by the GRI provides a comprehensive framework for CSR sustainability planning, performance assessment, and reporting. It provides learning and networking opportunities, report registration, and viewing databases, and has become a dominant hub for CSR reporting. The framework for the G4 guidelines are outlined as below. In order to prepare the G4 report, a number of decisions have to be made. First, a decision has to be made as to whether the organization will report on a limited or core basis or on a full or comprehensive basis. Then, there needs to be an agreement on the principles that will underlay the measurements of factors disclosed. Finally, the measurements are made and disclosures are crystallized. The UN Global Compact declares itself to be the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. It supports companies to do business responsibly by aligning their strategies and operations with 10 principles on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, and takes strategic actions to advance broader societal goals such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals with an emphasis on collaboration and innovation. Below you will find the UN Global Compact's 10 principles that were previously mentioned. The Compact's 10 principles are embodied in 3 categories: economic, environmental, and social, and include multiple subcategories. Issued by International Organization for Standardization, ISO 26000 focuses on the nature of CSR and on how an organization can prepare itself to contribute to sustainable development. It's noteworthy that when we create a CSR framework for a particular organization, it is essential that the framework respond to the actual stakeholder interests likely encountered. Here we have a schematic overview of ISO 26000 Guidance on Social Responsibility. The strategic accountability of corporations to stakeholders has become so evident and accepted that it would be short-sighted for an organization not to develop an effective concept of corporate citizenship and an effective program of corporate social responsibility. They will greatly facilitate better management of an organization's ethical culture and performance and the degree of support garnered from the stakeholder groups. More important, providing guidance to employees and others about the corporation's intended CSR or corporate citizenship expectations will reduce the ethics risks and enable the taking of ethics opportunities in an orderly way. Next, we will look at workplace ethics, whistleblower programs, and ethics inquiry services. Expectations for ethical behavior in workplaces have changed on several dimensions, and employers can no longer do whatever they want in employee matters. Here are a few examples of how things have changed. Employees cannot be fired based on an emotional whim or personal bias. The reason must be specifically related to the individual's inability to do the job. Employees cannot be hired based on even questioned on family status, religion, sexual preference, and several other legally protected subjects. They must be hired based on their ability to do the jobs in question. Sexual discrimination cases are usually decided based on what the person receiving the unwanted attention believes to be the case, rather than on what the person, often the manager or owner, providing the unwanted attention believes should be reasonable. Furthermore, the employer is held responsible for failing to provide a harassment-free workplace. Employers are expected to observe legal statutes or regulations that provide protection for employees from several frequently encountered situations, including lack of privacy and civility. Since the early 1970s, there has been an increasing awareness that the rights of individual workers were worthy of more respect relative to the rights of the employer than had ever been the case before. For example, the rights of an employer have changed. The employer can no longer order his or her employees to pollute, risk their health or safety or that of others, or say nothing when the truth was being distorted. By employees. If properly installed, the whistleblower programs and ethics inquiry services can act as a fail-safe information systems to protect the directors, personnel, and the company from reputational and functional damage from the unethical acts. First, these programs make it possible for employees to be able to exercise their conscience as described in the previous section. Second, these programs reinforce the organization's ethics objectives and provide a necessary element of the code and ethics program put in place to provide appropriate guidance to executives, managers, employees, and agents. Third, because members of boards and of directors, executives, and managers cannot be constantly in contact with all employees and agents, they must rely on information systems to bring them information on current performance and problems. Now we will look at an example of fraud and white-collar crime. While the fraud triangle indicates the three factors of a fraud's presence, need, opportunities, and rationales, the fraud diamond adds a fourth factor, capability or knowledge. Let's take a look at an example of Walter Pavlo. Walt Pavlo was a great-looking, blonde, athletic, and an MBA graduate and had a young wife and two young sons, and he had all the potential to become a star at MCI. Walt joined MCI in 1992 and rapidly became second in command at the company's finance unit. Walt left MCI in 1996 and ultimately resigned in early 1997. During the 4 years and just afterward, he participated in several frauds on MCI and on customers who were dealing with MCI. Maslow's hierarchy of needs could well explain how the needs to success were developed into the motivation of fraud in Walter Pavlo's case. Like many newly graduated MBAs, Walt had a super strong drive to succeed. He wanted to fulfill his dreams, to prove himself to his mother and father and to his wife and well-off family, to earn enough remuneration, to live comfortably, and to have enough for some indulgences, to be recognized for his contributions at work and be paid what he thought he was worth and have job security, and to be respected by and friendly with his boss, Ralph McCumber, a former military man. Walt's desires showed that he was motivated by the need for money to maintain his family and by job security. In addition, he wanted to earn the respect of his boss and other MCI employees and higher-ups. When it came time to create the Rapid Advanced Factoring program, he signed a guarantee for the financing bank without advising his superiors because he wanted to feel like he was really contributing. He wanted to feel the joy of fulfillment and self-actualization. Walt was subject to the influence of needs at all levels. Walt Pavlo's behavior conforms to Heath's set of 7 rationalizations. Walt justifies some of his behavior by his loyalty to his family. At first, he was just taking orders for the accounting chicanery he leads. He believed that someone else at a higher pay grade was responsible for determining whether the actions involved are ethical. Moreover, he also viewed the money he helped skim for MCI's shyster customers as a victimless hustle because it's stealing from crooks and scammers, because you can't steal what you're not going to get, indicating that he does not believe that there is any injury caused by his action. In addition, when Walt began to realize that he wasn't recognized for his good work and that been taken advantage of, he started feeling that the company owes him and that he is entitled to help himself by engaging in fraud. Furthermore, he took the view that many senior executives know what is going on and are turning a blind eye to the hiding of the size of the bad debt problems. He believed they know that the accounting and reporting systems are a mess, a veritable black hole, and are taking advantage of it. Finally, Walt justified some of his behavior by his loyalty to his family. He arranged for his father to buy a company and for his family to have a higher lifestyle that they would not otherwise have. As a result, his loyalty to his family takes precedence over his loyalty to MC. Even though there may be a need to commit fraud and the action can be rationalized, there must also be opportunities and the capacity or knowledge to commit fraud with acceptable levels of risk of getting caught and punished severely. In Walt's case, he views the MCI accounting system as a veritable black hole, an absolute shambles. There were some failings which provided the opportunity that Walt was looking for and the belief that he would not get caught. First, the reports were inaccurate and no one seems to mind. Second, there were no apparent controls over the accuracy of payment postings to the correct amounts. Walt was the only one who understood the nature and substance of the schemes that are being put in place. Third, ultimately, the economic value falsely created in MCI's financial statements is removed in a huge write-off attributed to other problems. Fourth, the senior managers were not performing their oversight role properly. Fifth, the organizational culture did not support whistleblowers and they were not encouraged to come forward, and the internal audit functions were not effective. Perhaps it was also his belief that he could control the situation so that he would not be found out. Ultimately, he realized that he could not control his greedy co-fraudsters, and he lost sight of the fact that he had ripped off a bank, not only scammers. Both misjudgments came back to haunt him. Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Heath's 7 rationalizations of unethical acts as frameworks to spot red flag problems before they cause or allow significant harm. These frameworks should also be considered when planning for or instituting new incentive and reward systems. There is a definite advantage to installing an ethical corporate culture with a whistleblower mechanism and instilling expectations of compliance with an ethical corporate culture from the beginning of employment, as well as reinforcing these expectations periodically. Additionally, although a military-like microculture where employees were expected to follow orders rather than exercise their own conscience looks attractive into the short run, it prevents longer-term benefits from surfacing and raises risk for the enterprise as a whole. Next, we will look at bribery and international operations. If any corporation operates outside of its domestic market, the normal guidance offered to employees must be reconsidered as to the following: how their usual operating practices will impact on the local economy and culture, whether different local foreign practices such as widespread gift giving or even bribery should be endorsed or banned, and the reaction to these changes by domestic stakeholders and particularly by primary stakeholders, including major customers and capital markets. Multinational corporations may have a significant impact on local cultures that they would not have domestically. They must be careful not to have unfavorable local impacts on the following areas: labor markets, including wage rates and availability of supply, raw material and other input markets, political and legal processes, and religious and social customs. The most difficult problems arise when the values of the primary corporate stakeholders differ from those in the local foreign country, including the following: approval of bribery, use of child labor, use of slave labor, unhealthy labor conditions, treatment of women, support of repressive regimes through location of operations, lack of freedom of association, respect for environment, and dealings with family members are expected but not avoided. A facilitating payment is usually nominal in value and made to speed up a result that would have happened anyway given enough time. For example, a small payment made to a customs official that all importers pay to facilitate movement of goods usually provides no competitive advantage. A bribe, on the other hand, is usually a larger payment than a nominal and is paid to gain competitive advantage and without which the desired result would not occur. Both payments are intended to influence outcomes, but some observers believe that a facilitating payment is of lesser ethical consequences than a bribe. Others do not agree so. The figure below shows worldwide anti-bribery developments that have taken place during the period of 1975 to 2016. In some cultures, particularly in Southeast Asia, China, and Japan, there is a long tradition of gift giving to cultivate long-term relationships that facilitate business dealings. In fact, however, corporations have found that they have been able to do business without bribery or facilitating payments, primarily because of excellent quality of their products and services. Two authors have made an extensive study of the ethics of foreign operations and have written excellent books on the subject. Tom Donaldson argued that multinational corporations and their agents operating in foreign cultures should adopt as a minimum standard of behavior the protection of the following fundamental human rights. By observing these fundamental rights, corporate would protect its moral right to exist. These rights include freedom of physical movement, ownership of property, freedom from torture, fair trial, non-discriminatory treatment, physical security, freedom of speech and association, minimal education, political participation, and subsistence. Richard DeGeorge suggested 7 practical action-oriented principles to guide which provides a basis for evaluating and responding to charges of unethical behavior. These principles include the following: do not intentionally direct harm, produce more good than harm for the host country, contribute by their activity to the host country's development, respect human rights of their employees, respect and work with that culture, not against it, provided that the local culture does not violate ethical norms, pay their fair share of taxes, and cooperate with local government in developing and enforcing just background institutions. According to Lurbinger, a crisis is an event that brings or has the potential for bringing an organization into disrepute and imperils its future profitability, growth, and possibly its very survival. If ethical behavior is considered to be of great importance by a corporation in its normal activities, ethical considerations should be even more important in crisis situations, since crisis resolution decisions usually define the company's future reputation. Fundamental to the proper management of a crisis is an understanding of 4 phases of a crisis: pre-crisis, uncontrolled, controlled, and reputation restoration. The main goal of crisis management should be to avoid crises. If this is not possible, then the impact should be minimized. This can be done by anticipating crises or recognizing early warning signs as soon as possible, and responding to soften and minimize the impact and shorten the time during which the crisis is uncontrolled. These goals can best be achieved by proper advanced planning, by continued monitoring, and by speedy, effective decision-making during the crisis. Ethics can be integrated into the decision-making process for crisis management in many ways. Specific instances involve prevention and warning, inclusion in an analytical approach, focusing a decision, and framing communications. In conclusion of this presentation, a corporate's success depends on the support from their stakeholders, and that depends on the respect shown for stakeholder expectations. Organizations would do well to observe the 6 hyper norms: honesty, fairness, compassion, integrity, predictability, and responsibility, all of which should be built into governance, risk management, strategy, operations, ethical decision-making, disclosure, and crisis management. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our presentation today. We hope it was very insightful. Goodbye.